everyone, and welcome back to the second episode of the OWL podcast, hosted by me, Olivia, and Liberty Harrison. Today we'll be interviewing one of Loudoun County High School's finest history teachers, Mr. Carr, and he'll be talking about a local hero, John Champ.
Yes, it's a rival school, but John Champ will be a Revolutionary War hero. He's born about 1750 in the Aldi area. And as the Revolution rolls around, he's going to join the, I believe it was the Loudoun County Dragoon, or Loudoun Dragoons, they were called, under Light Horse Harry Lee, who is another historical figure. Most know him more because of who his son was, which was Robert E. Lee. But he was a Revolutionary War hero that fought alongside Washington. So he fought brilliantly up until this point. He was an expert horse rider. He was supposedly a really big man, very trustworthy, honorable, and could just, everyone thought they could benefit him. So his best story is, as we go through the war, and as you may know, in early 1780, or you may not know, I should say, Benedict Arnold decides to become a traitor. He will be in charge of West Point. Benedict Arnold at this point has felt slighted by the Continental Congress. He doesn't feel he's been getting his just desserts for his victories at Saratoga and at Ticonderoga. He was very integral in, but he doesn't quite seem to get what he thinks is enough reward for this. And so he is growing increasingly irritated with him. And so when Washington appoints him to West Point, he decides to turn West Point over to the British and trade sides. He gets a lot of money for it from Major Andre and others. He is not successful in turning over West Point. Washington and others are able to hold on to it, but this is where John Champ comes in because Washington wanted someone to capture him. And he was talking to Lee, or Light Horse Harry Lee, and he asked for who would fit the bill of someone who could get this done. And he said the person he thought of was John Champ. So the idea behind it is John Champ was going to pretend to be a traitor, cross over to the British lines, capture Arnold without killing him, and squirrel him back to the American side. Of course, they knew John Champ would do it, but the biggest thing they were afraid John Champ wouldn't, because of the whole idea of he was so patriotic and so into it that pretending to be a traitor and having his whole family and all his friends think he became a turncoat to the British might be more than too much for him to do. But it's proposed to him. He agrees. He agrees to leave that night. Light Horse Harry Lee will try to do his best because he's probably got about a 4-hour ride from the American lines in New Jersey to the Hudson River, where he knows British warships are anchored. So at about 10 o'clock that night, someone comes to Lee and says, we saw someone take off towards the British lines. Lee's like, I don't think you got it right. Go back and check. So they go back and they search the camp and they find. So Lee knows he's going, but Lee's trying to give him time to get away. And so the soldier comes back and says, it's John Champ. He has left. He's taken all of his stuff and his horse is gone. And Lee's like, well, go get another commander to go chase him. So he wasted like 10, 15 more minutes while another commander came and said, go get him. And then for good measure, to make sure that they thought he was truly, turning coats, he said, and shoot him if you see him. And so like all night they're chasing him, and they almost catch him as he gets to the Hudson River. And Champ jumps into the river to get out to the galleys. And so the British sentries see the Americans coming, and they start shooting at the Americans. So like it was perfect timing to make it look legit. And so he gets on board. He tells them, Arnold has went away or has become a turncoat. He goes, I followed Arnold's lead, and there are many more like me who want to come and do this as well. Because that was the whole thing. They wanted the British to think there were more people. And so after like a half-hour interrogation, they give him a letter of basically approval to get through the rest of the British lines, to get into New York City. He meets with the higher-up British officials. I can't remember who's in charge now. I'm drawing a complete blank. In New York, and he then puts him on Arnold's staff. Arnold was putting together what he called the American Legion, which is funny because we have American Legions now for veterans. But they were going to be a sole American group to attack. And so the plan becomes, in Washington, another great story is the amount of spies Washington had in New York that the British were unaware of. Two were able to meet with with Champ, and they come up with a plan. The three of them are going to be able to capture, I think it was like in 3 days, they were going to capture Arnold, because every night he went out and walked around his place right over the river. So they were going to be able to sneak up, grab him, and whisk him away. And if anyone stopped him, he was just going to say, "Oh, it's a drunken sailor, we're taking him to the brig." And so they've got the whole thing planned. The day of Arnold gets permission to attack Virginia with his American Legion. So everybody's ordered on board the ships. Champ doesn't know where he's going. And even Washington and the spies don't know that this has happened, because literally Arnold just got approval. So literally at the 11th hour, his plan to capture him is thwarted, and he is sent to Virginia. So now here's poor Champ, who's trying to get a hold of Arnold, but now they're way down in Virginia, which ironically is where he came from. And he is able, after I think it's about a month, he is able to escape out to the west. Somehow he gets out of Yorktown, goes west into the mountains, and then reconvenes with Washington's forces. And then, of course, he went to North Carolina. That's where Lee was at the moment.
Right, and I'm going to pause you there, Mr. Carr. I'm assuming then here Washington and they tell everybody it was all fake, and then everyone starts congratulating Champ, telling him how great he is, that he did a great job. And then I think I remember reading somewhere that Champ wanted to rejoin the army, but Washington wouldn't let him. I think it was something with him being worried that the British would, if they happened to capture Champ, then he would be killed, I think. Can you explain that a bit more?
Because he escaped back from them, that it was a plot to get a hold of Arnold. Okay. And so Washington said, "No, you're going to be released from the army because we don't want you fighting." There are some reports. Growing up in West Virginia, where I grew, near the Moorefield, Petersburg area, we have a place called Champ Rocks. And if you've ever been hiking in West Virginia, a place called Seneca Rocks, Champ Rocks is right before you get to Seneca Rocks. And some in West Virginia lore, they say that's where Washington sent Champ to make sure the British couldn't capture him. There's not a lot of information on Champ from that point, other than he did own the land there. So he eventually moved there. Washington, if you remember, did all the surveying in the area for Lord Fairfax, so he was able to garner, he knew the land, sent him up there. And then, tragically, he dies at a place called Fort Pickett, out in near modern-day Fairmont, West Virginia, to south of Morgantown, at about age 49. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information after him, but he did own places down next to Aldie, and I believe there's even a Champ Ford down there named after him and all that kind of stuff. So that's the history of John Champ, and he tried to capture Benedict Arnold to pretend to be a traitor, but literally one day short, his plans were foiled. He had to escape himself to get back to the American side.
Wow, that's I didn't know all of that. I mean, I assumed once you said John Champ, but I heard John Champ High School, I was like, oh, the two definitely have to be related at that point.
That's who they named it after, because he's from Aldie, and that school was right down there around Aldie. And it was funny when he was when he did go to, there were other plots. Thomas Jefferson, when Arnold came down, Jefferson was governor of Virginia and tried to hire people to go in or entice people to go capture Arnold. And a captured American who was fighting in the war was captured, and Arnold questioned him. And they said, "What do you think the Americans will do to me if they capture him?" And they said, "Well, we'll cut off your leg and bury it with honors at Saratoga, because at the Battle of Saratoga, he gets shot in the leg, which is one reason he never gets to his just desserts, because he's in a hospital bed recovering from a wounded leg, so he doesn't get to go tell all that he did." So, but the guy's like, "Yeah, we'll cut off that good leg that took the wound for you, and then we'll hang the rest of you from the gallows." Arnold was not well liked, and like I said, that was the big thing. Champ was worried people would be like, slur his name because it looked like, because no one, I think Washington knew, Lee knew, and just a few of the spies in the Culpeper ring, or the Culper ring in New York City.
So it was a very confidential mission at that point.
Literally, Washington and Lee were the only ones that knew it. Like, they didn't tell anybody, and that's why Lee ordered him, if you see him and you catch him, shoot him. Because he had to make it look legit.
So they played it, like, almost perfectly. It was just that one day that screwed him over.
Yep, because if Arnold had not gotten permission to attack Virginia,
he wouldn't have.
They would have probably been able to squirrel him away across the Hudson. They had it all planned. A boat came in that night. Washington was actually waiting across the river. Washington came in that close. He was at at right across the river. I can't remember the name of the little town there, waiting for them to bring Arnold to him.
They were already there.
Because Arnold, like, Washington really liked Arnold. Most people don't know. You probably heard of Benedict Arnold being a traitor.
Yeah.
But before, if he had not been a traitor, we'd have statues to Benedict Arnold like we do Washington and everybody else. He was that much of a hero. So it was pretty hardcore for him to go to the British. Washington took it personally.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So why is this your favorite kind of local hero?
Well, I have several. I have a lot of history. Like, I have, like, my top 10 list of favorite people is about 100 long. So I just tried to focus on one here. We can do a future story on Daniel Morgan, who's from across the mountain in Winchester. So I don't know, I just love history stories. So I figured I'd do one that was, I just like his idea of going, trying to capture Arnold.
Yeah, and it kind of goes along because we were also doing a spy. Our first story was about
was it?
We did Juan Pedro Garcia.
Okay.
And all about his adventures with the Nazis. And
Nice. Who did that for you? Or did you do it yourself?
we did a bunch of research and put together our first episode, actually.
That's pretty cool.
So it's interesting that you get to live in Virginia and there's like so much history around you. Do you think that's impacted like what your favorite history stories are?
Probably. It's probably why I'm early American history. That's, if I would have stayed in college longer, I was going to be a professor, but I like to coach, so I decided to come down. That's why I get to teach DEs, because I stayed in college for so long, have so many grad school. But yes, being and I grew up in Moorefield, which is just west of Winchester. And I have to admit, my dad was a history teacher as well, American history, so it kind of runs in the family. But I just, we used to go to battlefields. Every trip we ever went on, we stopped somewhere historical. So
Awesome.
I
That's
do the same
really
with my son. And he watches all the history stuff with me. It's a lot of fun. Although he likes math, so he's going to go into math.
All right. I think, do you have any more questions?
I don't.
I don't either. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.